I, Sarah, 28, have spent more than 4 years with my fiancé, Matt. After approximately a year of engagement, we are now at last organizing our wedding, a day I have always dreamt about. For the past 4 months, I have spent a lot of time and energy organizing every little element. Everything has been coming together just as I had hoped. Months before. The wedding date was decided upon, the location was booked, invitations were delivered, and everything seemed ideal. Or so I reasoned. A little history about my family. Jeff and Linda, my parents, are an odd combo. Generally a calm, go-with-the-flow sort of man, my dad is 58 and works in construction. Though I love her, my 55-year-old mother has been a stay-at-home mother, always somewhat more vigorous. Both of them have always had a particular fondness for Ryan, my older brother. Married to Jenna, he is 32 and has 2 children. 3-year-old Molly and 5-year-old Ethan. Ryan has always been the golden child for my parents. He is aspirational but also prone to live in a fantasy world, following one great idea after another without really seeing any success from any of his business initiatives. Still, my folks bail him out all the time. I have always had to work things out on my own. I flew over when Matt proposed to me. Though I knew there would probably be some turmoil, I eagerly wanted to tell my family the news. That is exactly how things happen with Ryan around. And sure enough, Ryan quickly turned the discussion back to him when we announced our participation at a modest family gathering. He began discussing his most recent commercial endeavor, and our engagement news quickly took second place. Though I was annoyed, I let it pass as I wanted not to create a scene. That marked merely the beginning. After much preparation, Matt and I at last chose a wedding date that allowed everyone, including Ryan's parents and me, enough time to make plans. Before deciding on the day, I even asked them, and they promised they would be there. I assumed everything was under control. Still, I ought to have known better. Out of nowhere a few weeks ago, my parents phoned me stating they wanted to discuss the wedding. Their tone let me know something was wrong. My parents wanted me to move the wedding date as Ryan and his family had apparently scheduled a last-minute trip for the same week as my wedding. I startled myself. Months ahead, I had meticulously planned every element of this wedding. The invites had already been sent. Everything, venue, caterer, photographer, was reserved. Here they were, though, asking me to change the date as though it were no great difference so Ryan could travel on vacation. What I was hearing still astounds me. When I questioned them why they would plan a vacation so near the wedding, my mother said, "You know how full Ryan's calendar is. Their only chance to all depart was this. It dawned on me at that point. Once more, Ryan's ideas were taking front stage over mine. Though inwardly I was enraged, I attempted to remain cool. Changing the date was not a possibility, I informed them. Months had passed, and I was not going to reorganize my whole wedding to fit Ryan's trip. Always the mediator, my dad advised me to at least ask the venue if we may change dates, but I turned that down immediately. It was final on the date. My mother became agitated at this point, calling me irrational. She spoke endlessly about how family comes first, and that my rigidity was causing problems. She then launched the ultimate guilt trip, charging me of wanting to sour their connection with Ryan by skipping the date. It amazed me. A trip with Ryan had my own parents very much thinking about not attending my wedding. Worse, they were attempting to make me feel bad for not wavering. I was rather angry after they hung up. Matt urged me I should contact them back to attempt to smooth things out. He was enraged on my behalf. I attempted to convey how long I had been preparing this wedding, how much it meant to me, and how nasty it felt that they were even recommending I change the date. Still, it seemed like chatting to a wall. My dad kept bringing up how Ryan's family had already booked their flights and couldn't cancel them now, while my mom insisted I was acting irrationally. They totally disregarded my booking for everything for the wedding months in advance. Hoping she could talk some reason into my parents, I contacted my aunt, whom I know closely, to explain the circumstances. Startled, she vowed to talk to them. Maybe hearing it from someone else will help them recognize how foolish they were acting. My parents doubled down instead of backing off, though. They began phoning other relatives, characterizing me as the irrational one. They thought I was not compromising and was acting difficultly. My mother even indicated that I was envious of Ryan and wanted to punish him by not shifting the wedding date. Some of my relatives began supporting Ryan's family and said I should be more accommodating and thoughtful of them. Using guilt and familial pressure, it became very evident that my parents were trying to control me into yielding. Still, I was not going to let them prevail. I informed my folks the date was decided upon. Their choice was to skip if they couldn't make it. I wasn't going to modify it. This was my wedding, and I was quite entitled to maintain the date we had selected. And that marked last. Things were much more strained following the disaster with my parents and Ryan's vacation schedule. Standing in my position seemed to just make matters worse, even though I wanted at least to prove to my parents that I was serious. They kept pressing me, trying to persuade me to reschedule the date with any justification they could come up with. The guilt trip started to be intolerable. Every phone contact with my mother was exactly the same. She would begin by seeming as though everything was normal, then gently steer the discussion back to how unfair I was being to Ryan and how I was tearing the family apart by not considering their vacation plans. She spoke endlessly on how much my dad and she were doing to support Ryan and how difficult life was for him and his family. She would then drop the "family comes first" statement, as if I didn't give family any thought just because I wanted to keep my wedding date. One night, following yet another demanding phone contact with my mother, I simply collapsed. Sitting on the couch with Matt, I vented about how my own parents appeared more focused on Ryan's trip than on my wedding. As he usually does, Matt listened calmly and reassured me that I was not acting irrationally. That did not, however, simplify the matter for handling. The true turning point occurred when my mother called to inform my dad and me that they had talked it over, and that if I changed the wedding date, they would not be attending. What I was listening to seemed almost unbelievable. Should I fail to meet their expectations, my parents were quite threatening to call off my wedding. It tasted like a gut blow. My family should be there on my big day, all I had ever wanted, but right now they were handing me an ultimatum. The worst of all is also that they did not even look remorseful about it. Shock drove me to hang the phone, unable to understand how things had spiraled so far out of hand. Matt harbored resentment. His disbelief at my parents stooping so low motivated me to quit interacting with them until they came to sense. Though I could not help but feel depressed, I knew he was correct. About that time, my aunt contacted me once again. She had spoken with my parents, but instead of trying to reason with them, she had found something that made the whole matter even more frustrating. Apparently, the vacation was hardly at all a vacation. Ryan had planned a commercial trip to see possible international investors. His most recent company endeavor failed, and before he went under totally, he was looking for fresh backers. To assist him and present his ideas to the investors, my parents were supposed to travel with him. It was not only a family vacation then. They were ready to miss my wedding in order to preserve Ryan's faltering company, a last-ditch attempt. I went crazy. For my parents, Ryan's trip took precedence over my wedding, but to learn it was really another business venture? Too much was involved. Even believing they would have come around made me an idiot. Their determination to save Ryan from yet another financial catastrophe blinded them entirely, not merely from reason. I knew at this moment that I couldn't allow this slip. It was time to face Ryan squarely, I thought. I asked to meet personally when I phoned him. Simply put, I wanted to see his face when I informed him I knew the truth. I didn't want to let him construct a tale over the phone. I lost no time meeting with you. Laying everything out, I said I knew about the trip, the investors, and his financial circumstances. Ryan first tried to dismiss it, claiming it was only a coincidence the trip fell during my wedding week. I was not, however, buying it. I informed him our parents were sacrificing my wedding to assist him and that I knew he was using this trip to salvage his company. He became defensive at that point. Ryan began talking about how he was doing everything he could to support his family and how I didn't understand the pressure he was under. This was his final opportunity, he claimed, and he needed our parents' help to make it happen. Then he tried to guilt-trip me, charging me of being selfish for not pushing the wedding date to suit him. Given how terrible his financial position was, he really had the arrogance to suggest that, as his sister, I should be doing everything I could to assist him. What I was hearing stunned me. I reminded him that our parents had bailed him out before, and that it wouldn't be fair for them to keep giving everything up for him, particularly when it meant missing my wedding. Ryan, however, continued to push back, claiming that I was the one acting selfishly for not appreciating his dire circumstances instead of owning accountability. I was at last, sufficient. Straight out, I informed him I had no intention of changing my wedding date. He chose not to be there. I was not going to reorganize my whole life for his business concerns either. Not caring, I left him seated there, still attempting to defend himself. I finished following the Ryan encounter. I contacted his wife, Jenna. I wanted her side of things since I wasn't sure how much she understood about what was actually going on. She seemed nervous right from the beginning when we met for coffee. I didn't waste any time getting to the point. I asked her how much she knew about Ryan's economic problems and the actual purpose for the Europe trip. When I informed Jenna about the investors, she seemed truly startled. Although she knew their financial condition was poor, she acknowledged Ryan had been hiding a lot of things from her to keep her safe. She claimed she had been worried for a long time about Ryan's spending and frequency of depending on my parents for assistance. But every time she attempted to bring it up, he would shrug her off. Jenna appeared really offended when I told her how much this whole issue was stressing the family and me. She informed me she missed the wedding too, but she had traveled with Ryan, as Ryan had persuaded her it was very vital for their future. She agreed to discuss with Ryan another approach to managing things, but I knew Ryan well enough to know he wouldn't be likely to back down readily. Following my chat with Jenna, I understood that gathering the entire family and laying everything out on the table was the only way to straighten this problem. I convened a family conference without any apologies or delays. We have to resolve this once and permanently. I understood the family conference would not be simple. Weeks of increasing stress had been building, and it seemed as though everything was going to blow. I was not holding my breath. Once everything was out in the open, I hoped my parents would at last recognize how irrational they were being. Aaron and I traveled to my parents' place early on the meeting day. Though Aaron reassured me I was doing the right thing, I was anxious. I could sense the tension in the home as soon as we arrived. My parents were seated on the couch, clearly uncomfortable. Shortly thereafter, Ryan and Jenna came. Jenna looked as uncomfortable as I did, and Ryan had that protective look as though he was ready for a fight. We all gathered in the living room, and I lost no time straightforwardly getting to the point. I informed them I knew about Ryan's financial problems, the trip to Europe, and the true cause of it. I set it all out: the investors, the frantic effort to preserve Ryan's collapsed company, and how ready they were to miss my wedding for it. Ryan wasn't startled when initially my parents glanced at each other. Saying that it was just business and that the trip overlapped with my wedding was coincidence, he tried to minimize the entire issue, knowing well what I was talking about. I was not having it, though. I told them how wounded I felt that Ryan's company came first over my wedding and how they had been bailing him out for years while I had always had to fend for myself. I informed them that I was done being second in my own family. This was not the first time they had put Ryan's demands above mine. Saying they were only trying to assist both of their children, my mother began to cry. She stated they wanted not to have to decide between us, but I pointed out they had already decided by asking me to change the date of my wedding. Usually quiet, my dad kept silent, which infuriated me. He merely sat there gazing at the floor. I needed him to get up and say something. Of course, Ryan sprang in with his customary defenses. He continued on detailing his level of stress, how he was doing everything he could to support his family, and how this trip was his final opportunity to salvage his company. As usual, he sought to steer the discussion back to himself, implying that I was the one acting irrationally for not supporting him. Even more ridiculous, given all I wanted was to have my wedding as scheduled, he accused me of trying to undermine him out of jealousy. I then pulled out the collected evidence at that point. Between Ryan and my parents, I kept copies of emails covering the trip, the investors, and their intentions to keep it quiet. I even had the travel schedule, which amply demonstrated that it was set for the week of my wedding. Ryan's face flushed red with rage as my parents seemed to want to crawl beneath the couch. "You turned behind my rear?" he gasped. "You have always been sly like that. I gave no thought at all. I was not going to let them keep controlling me and making me feel bad about wanting to have my wedding on the date I had selected." The lies and the excuses had enough effect. The time was for the truth to surface. If they felt ashamed of it, that was their issue. Then something happened out of the blue. Jenna at last raised a voice. She had been sitting silently for most of the chat, but she intervened when Ryan started ranting. She informed him she hadn't comprehended the whole scope of the matter, and she was uncomfortable with the thought of missing my wedding. She claimed they had to come up with another solution for their financial woes, free from compromising family gatherings. Ryan seemed angry, but he said nothing. He was startled that Jenna was not supporting him. In that instant, I did indeed start to respect her somewhat. She had obviously decided to take up for herself as she was trapped between helping her spouse and following moral standards. Jenna was on my side, so I turned back to my folks. They had to decide. I advised them. Either they could give this trip first priority and miss my wedding, or they could find another way to assist Ryan without forsaking me. I made it plain that I was not going to modify the date and that, should they object, they were clearly choosing what they wanted. I'm not asking you to pick between Ryan and me, I added. You are here for me for once. This is my wedding, and I am entitled to have my family by my side. I could see my mother divided. She continued staring at Ryan as though she had nowhere else to turn. At last, my dad came out, stating they needed time to consider it. I wasn't surprised. Although my dad typically needed time to digest things, this time, I was not going to let them drag it out. I'll give you 24 hours to decide, I responded, getting to my feet. That's it, though, if you decide on the vacation instead of my wedding. I will not merely pardon and move on. I will terminate relations with both of you and not turn around. My parents looked shocked, and I could see this. They understood my seriousness. I was at my breaking point, and I wasn't going to let them treat me as if I didn't count. I was not going to let Ryan's difficulties ruin my wedding day. I warned them one final time as I started to go. I will go public with all of this if you force me to, I said. Ryan's final need is for his possible investors to learn about his financial crisis, so give it some careful thought. Aaron and I headed outside with that. I turned forward instead of back. The following 24 hours were agony. From my parents, Ryan, or Jenna, I got nothing. Though the waiting was terrible, I knew they were most likely trying to decide what to do. Aaron attempted to divert me, but I could scarcely concentrate on anything. Though I felt deep down that I had done what I needed to, I kept repeating the meeting in my thoughts, wondering whether I had gone too far. I wasn't going to allow Ryan's difficulties to mar the most important day of my life, and I wasn't going to let guilt drive me into postponing my wedding date. My phone at last rang the next day. My mom was it. My heart accelerated as my phone rang. My parents had decided. I knew this was it. Breathing deeply, I responded, not sure what to expect. Though her voice was unsteady, my mother did not waste any time. She said, Alex, your dad and I have spoken a lot about everything, and we understand we have made some major mistakes. We're sorry. We lost sight of what truly matters, as we had been so preoccupied aiding Ryan. I waited for her to get right to the point silently. We have postponed the Europe trip, she said gently. We are going to be at your wedding. Like we ought to have from the beginning, we are choosing to be there for you. Though I didn't let it show immediately away, I felt a tsunami of relief sweep over me. I had to make sure they meant it. What about Ryan? I inquired warily. Is he comfortable with this? A stop occurred here. Well, she said, he's not delighted about it. Though he is unhappy, he understands we choose what to do. This time he will have to work things out on his own without our support. I wasn't startled. Ryan had always turned to my parents to save him, and now they were at last setting limits. I felt validated, as though perhaps they were beginning to see the extent they had helped him over the years. Still, part of me was restless. I wasn't sure if Ryan would ever completely embrace their choice, or if this would lead to further issues down the road. Thank you, I murmured at last, somewhat lowering my defenses. I value your coming to the wedding. That means a great deal to me. We're sorry it came to this, my mom replied, her voice breaking. We should have placed you first, and we did not. But I swear we will be there. I hung up and experienced an unusual spectrum of feelings. One may argue that their decision to attend my wedding eased me. On the other hand, I couldn't get rid of the sense that the drama would not be ending. Ryan was still enraged, and I knew he would not let this go lightly. The days before the wedding were a whirlwind. While I was doing last-minute things, the stress about Ryan and my parents persisted at the rear of my consciousness. Since our argument, I hadn't talked to Ryan, and I wasn't sure whether he would even show up to the wedding. Though I knew that if he did, more anarchy would result, so part of me prayed he wouldn't. I got up early on the wedding morning and felt both excited and nervous. I tried to concentrate on the good. Today was Aaron and me celebrating our love. Not even Ryan. I wasn't going to let anybody destroy that Nancy, my maid of honor, stayed with me all morning getting ready. She is constantly encouraging me to stay on the positive, to savor every moment, and to resist letting anything else divert me. I appreciated her helping hand. The location was gorgeous, exactly as I had envisioned it. I felt calm as I walked down the aisle with my dad. The flowers were flawless, and the weather was just right. Sitting in front row as promised, my folks were there. While still a bit guarded, my dad looked proud while my mom grinned through tears. I had not felt as though they were really there for me in a long time. The event itself had magic. As we were saying wedding vows, Aaron gazed at me with much love in his eyes, and I felt as though nothing else counted. Everything was beautiful just at that time. Naturally, However, the tranquility was fleeting. I watched Ryan and Jenna stroll in just as the reception was getting underway. Not knowing whether they would turn up at all, they hadn't RSVP'd. My gut dropped right away upon seeing Ryan. He looked at me to indicate he was not only there to rejoice. Ryan headed directly to our parents and drew them away for a quiet chat. As they spoke, I could see the conflict on their faces. I knew this was not going to go easily. A few minutes later, Ryan came over to Aaron and me, leaving my parents clearly uncomfortable. "Congratulations," Ryan remarked, his voice flat. "I hope your big day is fun." Though I could sense the sarcasm pouring from his remarks, I remained cool, I said, attempting to keep things pleasant. "Thanks, Ryan." Ryan could not, of course, simply walk away from it at that. He began talking about his company problems, how difficult things had been for him, and how disappointed our parents had let him be by postponing the trip. Right then, in the middle of my wedding celebration, he was attempting to make everything about him. Aaron moved in before I could speak. "Ryan," he stated decisively, "this isn't the time or place for that. Today is our celebration of our marriage. Let's keep that the major emphasis." Ryan wasn't happy, but Aaron's cool yet forceful voice appeared to silence him, mumbled something under his breath, then turned away toward Jenna. Frustration at Ryan trying to bring his drama into my wedding mixed with relief that Aaron had handled it so brilliantly. I then deliberately tried to drive Ryan from my consciousness. I was not going to let him destroy the day I had so meticulously scheduled. Along with cutting the cake and spending time with our friends and relatives, Aaron and I danced. By night's end, even with the minor Ryan mishap, I was glad. Nothing could take the love of my life away from me. I was wedded to that. For Ryan, things changed dramatically in the weeks after the wedding. His company crumbled fast without my parents' financial assistance. He sought to attract additional investors, but those projects fell through without the Europe trip and parental support. Ryan had to declare bankruptcy within months. At last, Jenna, who had been becoming annoyed with Ryan's careless spending and bad judgment, found her breaking point. She left him with the children packed and moved in with her parents while she worked out her future moves. Ryan fled to gather the fragments of his life. Though I didn't like watching Ryan's fall from grace, I couldn't help but think this was the wake-up call he needed. He had depended on my parents to save him for far too long, never owning accountability for his own behavior. He now had to live with the results of his choices. For my part, things were at last beginning to calm. Seeing the harm frequent enabling had done to Ryan, my parents resolved to really try to change. I never imagined I would see them beginning to establish limits with him. They started also getting in touch to attempt to mend our friendship more often. Though it wasn't ideal and remained a lot of healing to go through, it was a start. Now that the wedding turmoil was behind us, Aaron and I started concentrating on our future together. All the turmoil had caused us to postpone our European honeymoon, but now we were going to at last travel the vacation of a dream. It seemed like the ideal celebration of the new phase of our lives. Looking back, I'm glad of my handling of things. Though it was difficult, standing up to Ryan and my parents was essential. I thought I was in charge of my own life for the first time in a very long time. Not even my family was going to allow anyone to take that away from me. Now, comma. As Aaron and I consider establishing a family of our own, I am more resolved than ever to design a life free from continual family conflict. Though we will always have difficulties, we will meet them together, on our own terms.